The gunshot echoed through the mountains, startling Olivia Frost as she urged her exhausted mare forward through the dense pine forest of northern New Mexico territory. Blood stained her torn riding dress. Though not her own, her brother's blood had splashed across her when the outlaws ambushed their stagecoach just outside Raton. The April night was closing in fast, the last rays of sunlight barely filtering through the trees as her horse stumbled on the uneven terrain. Somewhere behind her, hoofbeats pursued whether lawman or outlaw, she couldn't be certain, and she dared not wait to find out. "Come on, Penny," she whispered to her mare, the animal's labored breathing matching her own panic. "Just a little farther." Olivia had fled Philadelphia 3 weeks ago, leaving behind a life of privilege and an unwanted engagement to a man 30 years her senior. Her brother Thomas had promised her a new beginning in Santa Fe, away from their father's gambling debts and violent temper. Now Thomas lay dead, and Olivia was alone in a wilderness she knew nothing about, with night falling and unfamiliar dangers lurking in every shadow. The trail widened suddenly, opening into a small clearing where a crude log cabin stood. Smoke curled from its chimney, and a lantern glowed in the window. Olivia hesitated, torn between fear of whoever might dwell inside and the terror of spending the night alone in the forest. The decision was made for her when Penny stumbled again, this time going down on one knee before struggling back up with a pained whinny. The poor animal couldn't go any farther tonight. As Olivia dismounted, the cabin door swung open. A tall figure stepped out, rifle raised. "That's far enough," a deep voice called out. "State your business, please," Olivia said, her voice cracking. "I mean no harm. My brother and I were attacked on the road to Raton. He didn't make it. I just need somewhere safe for the night." The man stepped forward, his face becoming visible in the fading light. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of the stormy sea. A week's worth of beard shadowed his jaw, and a wide-brimmed hat sat low on his brow. "You're bleeding," he said, lowering his rifle slightly. "It's not my blood," she replied, feeling suddenly lightheaded as the events of the day caught up with her. The man approached cautiously, keeping his rifle ready but not aimed directly at her. As he drew closer, Olivia swayed on her feet. The last thing she remembered was the stranger lunging forward to catch her before she hit the ground. Olivia awoke to warmth and the smell of coffee. She lay on a narrow cot covered with a rough wool blanket, her riding boots removed and placed neatly beside the bed. The cabin was small but tidy, with a stone fireplace at one end where a pot hung over the flames. The stranger sat at a simple wooden table, cleaning his rifle by the light of an oil lamp. When she stirred, he looked up. "Good evening, madam. Thought you might sleep till morning." Olivia struggled to sit up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "How long was I unconscious?" "About an hour. Your horse is tended to. She's got a slight strain but should be fine with rest." He set aside his rifle and poured coffee into a tin cup. "Name's Wade Garrett." "Most folks call me Garrett." "Olivia Frost," she replied, accepting the cup he offered. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Garrett. Just Garrett's fine." He studied her with those intense eyes. "You said you were attacked on the road, stagecoach robbery." Olivia nodded, clutching the warm cup between her trembling hands. "4 men. They wore bandanas over their faces. My brother tried to protect me and they—" Her voice broke. "They shot him without hesitation." Garrett's expression hardened. "Probably the Keller gang. They've been hitting the stages between here and Trinidad. Sheriff's been after them for months." He paused. "How'd you get away?" "When they were distracted, looting the other passengers, I managed to reach my horse. One of them saw me and fired, but I made it into the trees." The memory brought fresh tears. I couldn't even bury my brother." "I'm sorry about that," Garrett said, his voice gentler than she expected from such a rugged man. "First thing tomorrow, I'll ride with you to Raton. Sheriff Hodges is a good man. He'll send a party to recover to bring your brother in proper." "You do that for a stranger," Garrett shrugged. "It's what decent folks do." He stood and moved to the fireplace, stirring something in the pot that smelled like beans and bacon. "You should eat, then rest. It's a half-day's ride to town." As he dished food onto a tin plate, Olivia noticed the way he kept glancing toward the windows, which were shuttered tight despite the mild spring evening. "Are you expecting trouble?" she asked. "Just cautious," he replied, handing her the plate. "Those men might be looking for you. Witnesses to murder don't fare well in these parts if the killers find them first." The thought sent a chill through her. Olivia set the plate aside, suddenly not hungry. "I should leave. I've put you in danger by coming here. You wouldn't get far tonight, especially with your mare needing rest." Garrett sat back down, his expression unreadable. "Besides, these mountains ain't friendly after dark. Wolves, bears, mountain lions, all manner of things that consider humans fair game." The mention of predators made Olivia's heart race. Her city upbringing had not prepared her for such dangers. She glanced nervously at the shuttered windows, imagining glowing eyes watching from the darkness. Garrett seemed to read her thoughts. "You're afraid of the night," he observed quietly. Olivia didn't deny it. "I always have been, even in Philadelphia, out here. It seems the darkness has teeth and claws." The cowboy's weathered face softened slightly. "Then I'll keep watch till morning," he said simply, checking that his revolver was loaded before tucking it into his belt. "No harm will come to you while you're under my roof." Something in his tone, the quiet certainty, the lack of boasting, made Olivia believe him. For the first time since the attack, she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. "Thank you," she whispered. "Eat your supper," he replied, nodding toward the plate she'd set aside. "Tomorrow will come soon enough." Olivia did as he suggested, surprised by how hungry she actually was. As she ate, Garrett told her about Raton, a growing railroad town nestled at the foot of the mountains, with decent lodgings for a lady and a telegraph office where she could send word to any family back east. "I don't have any family left," she admitted. "Just my father and he. Well, he's the reason I left Philadelphia." Garrett didn't press for details. Instead, he refilled her coffee cup and said, "New Mexico's full of folks making fresh starts. Territory's rough in places, but there's opportunity for those willing to work. My brother had secured a position for me as a schoolteacher in Santa Fe," Olivia said. "I've been educated. I can read and write and do figures. I taught children of our neighbors in Philadelphia." "Raton's looking for a schoolmarm," Garrett said. "Town's growing fast with the railroad bringing in families. Might be worth asking about while you decide what's next." The idea of staying in Raton hadn't occurred to Olivia. She'd been so focused on reaching Santa Fe, on the plan she and Thomas had made. But now, alone and far from everything familiar, any friendly place seemed worth considering. As the evening wore on, Garrett moved his chair near the door, rifle across his lap. He insisted Olivia take the cot, while he would keep watch from his position. "Don't you need to sleep?" she asked, settling onto the narrow bed. "I'll manage," he said. "Used to standing watch during the war. You fought," he nodded. "Union cavalry. Was just a boy when I joined up, barely 17. Spent 3 years in the saddle, learned to sleep with one eye open." Olivia wanted to ask more about the war, about what had brought him to this remote cabin in the New Mexico mountains, but exhaustion was quickly overwhelming her. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the silhouette of Wade Garrett against the dim firelight, steady and watchful as the night deepened around the cabin. Dawn came with birdsong and the smell of fresh coffee. Olivia woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until her gaze landed on Garrett. He stood at the cabin's small window, the shutters now open, morning light illuminating his profile. He'd shaved, she noticed, and changed his shirt. With his beard trimmed, she could see he was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and the kind of weathered features that spoke of a life lived outdoors. "You kept watch all night," she observed, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled dress. Garrett turned, a hint of surprise crossing his face as if he hadn't realized she was awake. "Said I would. Don't you ever break your word, Mr. Garrett." A faint smile touched his lips. "Not if I can help it." He gestured toward the fireplace where a pot of something bubbled. "Breakfast's nearly ready. We should leave within the hour if we want to make Raton by midday." While Olivia freshened up using the basin of clean water Garrett had provided, he stepped outside to check on the horses. She took the opportunity to assess her appearance in the small shaving mirror hanging on the wall. Her dark blonde hair was a tangled mess, her face pale with smudges of dirt and fatigue beneath her eyes. Her riding dress, once a fashionable deep blue, was torn at the hem and stained with her brother's blood. She did her best with what she had, washing her face and hands, combing her fingers through her hair before twisting it into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. There was nothing to be done about the dress, but she covered the worst of the bloodstains with her traveling cloak. When Garrett returned, he pretended not to notice her disheveled state, serving her a bowl of oatmeal sweetened with molasses and dried apples. They ate in companionable silence, and Olivia found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. For a man living alone in the wilderness, he had surprisingly refined manners, not formal or affected, but considerate in a way that suggested good breeding. "You weren't always a mountain man," she observed as he collected their empty bowls. Garrett raised an eyebrow. "What makes you say that?" "The books," she replied, gesturing to a shelf where several volumes were neatly arranged. Thoreau, Emerson, Homer, not typical reading for a hermit. For a moment, something guarded passed over his face, but then he shrugged. "My mother was a schoolteacher. She believed education was important, even for a boy who'd likely spend his life working cattle." "Is that what you do, work cattle?" "Have a small spread about 5 miles south," he said, packing supplies into saddlebags. "This cabin's just a hunting lodge I use when checking trap lines in the higher country. Yet you have books here." A ghost of a smile. "Company for long winter nights." An hour later, they were on horseback heading down the mountain trail. Garrett led the way on a sturdy buckskin gelding, while Olivia followed on Penny, who seemed recovered after a night's rest. Garrett had insisted on bringing extra ammunition and provisions, explaining they would take a less traveled route to avoid any encounter with the Keller gang. "They'll be watching the main road," he said, "especially if they think you can identify them." The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of spring day that promised warmth by noon. As they rode, Garrett pointed out landmarks and signs of wildlife: a mountain lion's tracks crossing the trail, the scratchings of a bear on a tree trunk, the distant silhouette of an eagle soaring above the valley. "You know these mountains well," Olivia commented. "Been here 8 years," he replied. "A man learns to read the land if he wants to survive." "What brought you here? From wherever you were before?" Garrett was quiet for so long that Olivia thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "After the war, I couldn't settle. Tried going home to Missouri, but everything had changed, or maybe I had. Drifted west, worked cattle drives up from Texas, then found this country." He gestured to the sweeping vista of mountains and valleys. Something about it felt right. Like I could breathe again. There was more to the story, Olivia sensed, but she didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, their wounds. She certainly had her own. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat some dried beef and hardtack from Garrett's provisions. As they sat on sun-warmed rocks beside a small creek, Olivia found herself telling him about Thomas, her brilliant, kind-hearted brother who had always protected her, even from their father's drunken rages. He was only 26, she said, watching a dragonfly skim the water's surface. Too young to die so far from home. How old are you, if you don't mind my asking? Garrett inquired. 21 last November, she replied. Old enough to know I couldn't stay in Philadelphia, not with Thomas gone and my father arranging a marriage to settle his gambling debts. Garrett's expression darkened. A father who'd sell his daughter that way deserves no respect. The man he chose was 62, a business associate with a reputation for cruelty to his servants and his previous wife, Olivia continued, surprising herself with her candor. When I refused my father, well, let's just say he made his displeasure known. Instinctively, her hand went to her cheek where the bruise had finally faded. Garrett's gaze followed the gesture, his eyes narrowing. That's when Thomas arranged for me to come west, she finished. He'd been in Santa Fe for 2 years, working as a land surveyor for the railroad. He sent money for my passage and arranged the teaching position. Your brother sounds like a good man, Garrett said softly. He was the best of men. Tears threatened again, but Olivia blinked them back. She'd cried enough. Now she needed to be practical to make decisions about her future. I'm not sure what I'll do now. I have some money. Thomas insisted I sew gold coins into the lining of my cloak before I left Philadelphia. Enough to start over somewhere, I suppose. Raton's as good a place as any, Garrett suggested. Like I said, they need a teacher. Town's growing, decent folks for the most part. Do you go there often? He shook his head. Couple times a year for supplies. I can't produce myself. Prefer my own company most days. Yet you're helping me, Olivia observed. Taking a full day away from your work to escort a stranger to town. Garrett's eyes met hers, serious and direct. Some things matter more than work, Miss Frost. The way he said it, simple and honest, made her chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't name. Before she could respond, he was on his feet, offering his hand to help her up. We should keep moving, he said. Still have a few hours' ride ahead. As they continued their journey, the terrain gradually changed from dense forest to more open country, with sweeping views of the distant plains to the east. By mid-afternoon, Olivia could see smoke from chimneys rising in the distance, the first sign of Raton. There she is, Garrett said, pointing to the collection of buildings nestled at the base of a rugged cliff. Not much to look at compared to Philadelphia, I expect, but it's growing fast. Railroads bringing new folks every month. Indeed, as they drew closer, Olivia could see that while some buildings were the rough log structures she'd expected, others were more substantial brick and clapboard constructions lining a main street that bustled with activity. There was a proper church steeple visible, several 2-story buildings that appeared to be businesses, and at the edge of town, the railroad station where a train stood billowing steam. It's larger than I expected, she admitted. Like I said, it's growing. That's the Denver and Rio Grande line, Garrett explained, nodding toward the train. Connects north to Colorado and south to Santa Fe and Albuquerque. They approached town from the west, skirting around to enter from the north road rather than the main eastern approach from the plains. Safer this way, Garrett explained. If anyone's watching for you, they'll be on the stage road. As they rode into town, Olivia was acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. People glanced at them curiously. A rough-looking mountain man accompanying a lady in a blood-stained dress was evidently not an everyday sight, even in a frontier town. Garrett led them directly to a two-story building with a sign proclaiming it the office of Sheriff J.D. Hodges, Colfax County. He dismounted and helped Olivia down, then tied both horses to the hitching post. "Best to report what happened straight away," he said, offering his arm to steady her as they climbed the wooden steps to the office. Inside, a lean, gray-haired man with a silver star pinned to his vest looked up from paperwork spread across a scarred desk. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of them. "Wade Garrett," he said, rising to his feet. "Been a while since you graced us with your presence." "Sheriff," Garrett nodded. "Wish it was under better circumstances. This is Miss Olivia Frost. She was on yesterday's stage from Trinidad when it was attacked by bandits. Her brother was killed." Sheriff Hodges's expression turned grave. "Madam, please accept my condolences." He pulled forward a chair. "Sit down and tell me everything you remember." For the next hour, Olivia recounted the details of the attack while the sheriff took notes. She described what little she could recall of the bandits. One had a distinctive scar visible even above his bandana. Another spoke with what sounded like a Texas drawl. The leader had worn an unusual silver concho hatband that had caught the sunlight. "That's Keller all right," Sheriff Hodges said grimly when she mentioned the hatband. "Been trying to catch him and his boys for months now." He set down his pencil. "Miss Frost, I'll organize a party to recover the remains and the mail from the stage. We'll need you to make a formal identification, I'm afraid." "I understand," Olivia said, though the thought of seeing Thomas's body again made her stomach clench. "In the meantime, you'll need lodging." The sheriff looked to Garrett. "Mrs. Abernathy at the boarding house might have a room." "I was thinking the same," Garrett agreed. "Miss Frost mentioned she's qualified as a teacher. I recalled hearing the town was seeking one." Sheriff Hodges's eyebrows rose. "That's so? Well now, that's fortunate timing. The school board's been desperate since Miss Winters ran off with that drummer last month." He turned to Olivia. "You'd want to speak with Mr. Branson at the Mercantile. He chairs the school board." "I'll consider it," Olivia said, though in truth, she wasn't sure what she wanted. Everything had happened so fast. Thomas's death, her flight, meeting Garrett. She'd had no time to think beyond immediate survival. "For now, let's get you situated at the boarding house," Garrett said, obviously sensing her overwhelm. "You need proper rest and clean clothes before making any decisions." Sheriff Hodges nodded approval. "I'll send word when we return when we bring your brother in. Likely be tomorrow. And Miss Frost," his voice softened, "will find Keller and his gang. You have my word on that." Outside, the afternoon sun was slanting toward the western mountains. Garrett helped Olivia back onto her horse, and they rode slowly down the main street toward a neat white house with green shutters at the south end of town. "Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house," Garrett explained. "Respectable place. She's particular about who stays there. No rowdy cowboys or minors allowed." "Will she admit me looking like this?" Olivia gestured to her disheveled appearance. "Once she hears your story, she'll take you in," he assured her. "Martha Abernathy's got a good heart under that stern exterior." Indeed, the prim widow who answered the door took one look at Olivia's condition and ushered her inside with brisk efficiency, clucking with sympathy when Garrett briefly explained their circumstances. "You poor child, Mrs. Abernathy said, leading Olivia toward the stairs. "I've a nice room at the back of the house, very quiet, and I'll draw a hot bath straight away. Nothing helps trouble like a good soak. And those clothes," she shook her head at Olivia's ruined dress. "We must get you something proper to wear." Olivia glanced back at Garrett, who remained by the door, hat in hand. "Mr. Garrett, I don't know how to thank you." "No need," he said. "I'll stable your horse at the livery and see to your trunk if it's survived the robbery." You're not leaving town yet. The question came out more anxiously than she'd intended. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something warmer. Not right away. Need supplies, and I should give my statement to the sheriff about finding you. He settled his hat back on his head. I'll call tomorrow to see how you're faring. With that, he was gone, and Olivia was swept upstairs by the efficient Mrs. Abernathy into a world of feminine comforts she'd thought never to see again. The promised bath was heavenly, and Mrs. Abernathy provided a borrowed dress that, while a bit large, was clean and presentable. Over a simple dinner of chicken stew and fresh bread, Olivia learned that her hostess was a widow of 5 years whose husband had been Rayton's first mayor. Town was hardly more than a few shacks when we arrived in '68, Mrs. Abernathy explained. George, my late husband, saw the potential once the railroad announced its plans. Bought land, built this house. Now I take in boarders, only the respectable sort, mind you, to supplement my income. It's a lovely home, Olivia said sincerely. After her forest flight and the rustic cabin, the neat boarding house with its wallpapered rooms and proper furniture seemed luxurious. Thank you, dear. Mrs. Abernathy poured more tea. Now, Garrett mentioned you're a teacher. I was to be in Santa Fe. I've taught children in Philadelphia, though not in a formal school setting. Well, our school's been without a teacher for nearly a month. 28 children ranging from 6 to 16, all going wild as jackrabbits while the board tries to find someone. The widow leaned forward. Between us, they're desperate enough that they might overlook your lack of formal credentials, especially if Garrett vouches for you. Mr. Garrett would do that. Olivia was surprised. He hardly knows me. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes twinkled. Wade Garrett doesn't escort just anyone into town, dear. In the 8 years he's lived in these mountains, I've never known him to bring a soul to Raton, let alone a young lady. She sipped her tea. His recommendation would carry weight. He's respected hereabouts, despite his preference for solitude. Later, lying in a real bed with clean sheets for the first time in weeks, Olivia tried to make sense of the events that had brought her to this point. 3 days ago, she'd been traveling with Thomas, full of hope for their new life in Santa Fe. Now her brother was dead, and she was considering taking a teaching position in a town she'd never heard of until yesterday, all on the recommendation of a man who was still largely a mystery to her. Yet despite the tragedy and upheaval, despite being alone in a strange place, Olivia felt an odd sense of possibility. Perhaps it was simply exhaustion, or the aftereffects of shock. Or perhaps it was the memory of Wade Garrett's quiet promise. I'll keep watch till morning. He had kept that promise. In a world where her own father had been willing to sell her in marriage, where outlaws murdered innocent travelers without remorse, that simple act of integrity meant something. Olivia drifted off to sleep, thinking of sea-gray eyes and wondering if Garrett truly would return tomorrow as he'd said. Morning brought clarity, and with it, decisions to be made. After a breakfast of eggs and bacon served by Mrs. Abernathy's Mexican cook, Olivia counted the gold coins sewn into her cloak. 20 double eagles, $400, a substantial sum that could take her to Santa Fe as planned or even back east if she chose. But Thomas had died trying to bring her west. Running home felt like betraying his sacrifice. And what waited for her in Philadelphia but her father's rage and the unwanted suitor when Mrs. Abernathy informed her that Mr. Branson from the school board would be happy to interview her that afternoon. Olivia decided to at least explore the possibility. A teaching position would provide respectable employment and time to consider her next steps. Her first priority, however, was acquiring suitable clothing. In her borrowed dress, Olivia ventured out with Mrs. Abernathy to the mercantile, where she purchased 2 ready-made dresses, undergarments, and other necessities. The owner, Mr. Branson himself, was a jovial man who expressed enthusiasm about her teaching qualifications and invited her to return at 2 o'clock to meet with the school board. As they left the store, Olivia caught sight of a familiar figure across the street, Wade Garrett, emerging from the gunsmith shop. Even at a distance, she recognized his distinctive stride and the set of his shoulders beneath his buckskin jacket. He saw her at the same moment, pausing before crossing the dusty street to join them. "Miss Frost," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Abernathy, you're looking better this morning." This last was directed at Olivia, his eyes taking in her improved appearance with what seemed like approval. "Thanks to Mrs. Abernathy's hospitality," Olivia replied. "And to you, Mr. Garrett. I never properly thanked you for everything you've done." He dismissed her gratitude with a slight shake of his head. "Any news from the sheriff?" "Not yet," Mrs. Abernathy answered. "But Jim Hodges is reliable as sunrise. If he said he'd bring in Miss Frost's brother today, he will." "I spoke with him this morning," Garrett said. "He's organizing a burial plot at the cemetery if that meets with your approval, Miss Frost." The thought of burying Thomas so far from home brought fresh grief, but Olivia nodded. "Yes, that would be appropriate. Thank you for arranging it. Least I could do." Garrett shifted, seeming uncomfortable with her thanks. "I also checked at the livery. Your horse is doing well, and they recovered your trunk from the stage. It's at the sheriff's office. Seems the bandits didn't bother with luggage, just the strongbox and valuables from passengers." "That's wonderful news," Olivia said, genuinely relieved. The trunk contained all her worldly possessions, including mementos of her mother and books that Thomas had given her over the years. "I was afraid it was lost, Mr. Garrett." Mrs. Abernathy interjected. "Miss Frost has an interview with the school board this afternoon. Perhaps you might put in a good word. You've always had Mr. Branson's ear." Garrett looked surprised, then turned to Olivia. "You're considering staying in Raton?" "I'm considering all my options," she replied carefully. "Teaching is what I know, and I need employment if I'm to support myself." Something like approval flickered in his eyes. "I'll speak with Branson if you wish it." "I would appreciate that," Olivia said. "Though I hope to earn the position on my own merits." "I've no doubt you will." He glanced toward the sheriff's office. "I should check if Hodges has returned. They'll need a formal identification." He trailed off, obviously reluctant to remind her of the painful task ahead. "I understand," Olivia said. "I'll be at the boarding house until my interview. Please send word when they return." Garrett nodded, touched his hat again to both women, and strode away toward the sheriff's office. Olivia watched him go, struck again by the contradictions in the man, the solitary mountain dweller who read philosophy, the rough exterior that hid unexpected gentleness. "Remarkable man," Mrs. Abernathy observed, following Olivia's gaze. "Came here after the war, didn't say much about his past. Bought land up in the mountains, built himself a ranch from nothing. Keeps to himself mostly, but there's not a person in Colfax County who wouldn't vouch for his character." "He mentioned losing his mother," Olivia said as they continued toward the boarding house. "But he hasn't spoken much about his life before coming here." "Some men don't like revisiting their pasts," Mrs. Abernathy said sagely. "The war left many scars, not all of them visible. But whatever ghosts Wade Garrett carries, he's a good man. One of the best." At the boarding house, Olivia changed into one of her new dresses, a sensible navy blue with white collar and cuffs that seemed appropriate for a teacher. She was pinning up her hair when a knock came at her door. It was Mrs. Abernathy, her expression solemn. "The sheriff's returned, dear." Mr. Garrett is downstairs waiting to escort you. The identification was as difficult as Olivia had feared. Thomas's body, now cleaned and laid out in the undertaker's back room, bore little resemblance to the vibrant brother she'd known. The bullet had struck him in the chest, killing him instantly according to the doctor who'd examined him. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless to know he hadn't suffered. Sheriff Hodges was respectful and efficient, recording her formal statement and assuring her that the search for the Keller gang would continue. "We recovered the mail and some personal effects from the stage," he added, producing a leather satchel that Olivia recognized as Thomas's. "Your brother's papers. Thought you might want them." Through it all, Garrett remained at her side, a steady, quiet presence. When they stepped back into the sunlight, he offered his arm to support her, and Olivia took it gratefully. "The funeral will be tomorrow morning," he said as they walked slowly back toward the main street. "I took the liberty of speaking with Reverend Collins at the church. He'll perform a proper service." "You've thought of everything," Olivia said, struggling to maintain her composure. "Why are you doing all this for me, Mr. Garrett? You could have simply brought me to town and gone back to your life." He was quiet for a long moment before answering. "When I found you at my cabin, you reminded me of someone I knew once, someone I couldn't help." He looked straight ahead as he spoke, his profile carved against the bright sky. "Perhaps this is my way of making amends." Before Olivia could ask what he meant, they reached the Mercantile where Mr. Branson waited for her interview. Garrett stepped back, releasing her arm. "I'll wait for you," he said. "Take your time." The interview went better than Olivia could have hoped. The school board, consisting of Mr. Branson, the bank manager, and the town doctor, seemed impressed with her educational background and her experience teaching children in Philadelphia. When she explained that her journey to Santa Fe had been interrupted by tragedy, their sympathy was evident. "The position pays $30 a month," Mr. Branson explained. "The schoolhouse is at the north end of town, small but adequate. There's a room at the back where the teacher traditionally lives." "You mean I would reside at the school?" Olivia asked, surprised. "It's customary in these parts," the bank manager, Mr. Peterson, explained. "Provides security for the building and convenience for the teacher. It's a simple arrangement, but the living quarters are private and respectable for a single lady." The salary was modest but fair, and the included housing would allow her to save most of her earnings. More importantly, the position would give her purpose and stability while she adjusted to her new circumstances. "When would you need me to begin?" she asked. "The children have been without instruction for nearly a month," Dr. Williams, the third board member, said. "The sooner the better, though we understand you'll need time to attend to personal matters first. After my brother's funeral tomorrow, I would be prepared to start immediately," Olivia said firmly. "That is, if you decide to offer me the position." The three men exchanged glances. Mr. Branson smiled. "I believe we've heard enough, Miss Frost. The position is yours if you want it." Outside, Garrett was waiting as promised, leaning against a hitching post with the patient stillness of a man accustomed to solitude. When Olivia emerged, something in her expression must have conveyed her news because he straightened, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "They offered you the position," he stated rather than asked. "Yes," she confirmed. "I start after tomorrow." She couldn't bring herself to say, "after burying my brother." Garrett nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's a good school. Small, but the children are eager learners. Town takes education seriously." "You sound like you know the school well," Olivia observed as they began walking back toward the boarding house. "I helped build it," he admitted. 4 years ago, when the town decided they needed a proper schoolhouse instead of using the back room of the church. I had experience with carpentry from building my own place. A man of many talents, Olivia said, finding a small smile despite her grief. Cowboy, hunter, carpenter, philosopher. Jack of all trades, master of none, he replied with a self-deprecating shrug. Out here, a man learns to do whatever needs doing. They reached the boarding house where Garrett paused at the bottom of the steps. I'll come for you tomorrow morning at 9. The service is at 10. Will you stay? For the service, I mean. Olivia wasn't sure why his answer mattered to her, only that the thought of facing tomorrow without his steady presence was suddenly daunting. Garrett studied her face for a long moment. If you wish it. I do, she said simply. He nodded once, then touched his hat in farewell before turning to go. Olivia watched him walk away, struck by the realization that in less than 2 days, this stranger had become the person she trusted most in this unfamiliar world. That night, Olivia sorted through Thomas's satchel, finding his surveying notes, letters from colleagues in Santa Fe, and a sealed envelope addressed to her in his familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal. The letter inside was dated just 3 days before their journey, written from Trinidad, where Thomas had been completing a project before meeting her stagecoach. My dear Olivia, it began. If you are reading this, then something has prevented me from reaching Santa Fe with you. I pray it is merely a delay, but a man in my profession learns to prepare for all contingencies. The letter continued with practical matters: the location of his bank account in Santa Fe, the address of his employer who had promised Olivia the teaching position, instructions for settling his affairs. But the final paragraph brought fresh tears. Whatever happens, dear sister, know that your courage in leaving Philadelphia has filled me with pride. You deserve a life of your own choosing, free from father's tyranny and the constraints that have bound you. The West may seem wild and frightening at first, but there is freedom here for those brave enough to grasp it. Trust your instincts, Olivia. They have never led you astray. And remember that even in the darkest night, morning always comes. With all my love, Thomas. Even in the darkest night, morning always comes. The phrase echoed Garrett's promise to keep watch until dawn. Somehow the coincidence comforted her, as if Thomas himself were approving her decision to remain in Raton rather than continuing to Santa Fe alone. Tomorrow she would bury her brother. The day after, she would begin her new life as Raton's schoolteacher. It wasn't the future she'd planned, but perhaps it was the one she was meant to find. The morning of the funeral dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed at odds with the somber occasion. Olivia, dressed in her black traveling dress, now cleaned of dust, but still bearing faint bloodstains that no amount of scrubbing could remove. Mrs. Abernathy had found a black veil for her to wear, and Olivia was grateful for the partial concealment it provided as she prepared to face the town as the bereaved sister. True to his word, Garrett arrived at 9, dressed more formally than she had yet seen him. He wore a clean black coat over a white shirt, his usual trail-worn clothes exchanged for attire befitting a funeral. He'd even polished his boots, she noticed. His hair, usually hidden beneath his hat, was neatly combed, revealing streaks of premature silver at his temples that spoke of hardships endured. "You look," he began, then seemed at a loss for words. "Like a widow," Olivia finished for him, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mrs. Abernathy insisted on the veil, said it was proper. "She's right," he agreed, offering his arm. "It's a small town. People will talk less if you observe the formalities." The church was a simple whitewashed building with a modest steeple, the kind found in small towns across America. Inside, Olivia was surprised to find several people already seated. Sheriff Hodges, Mr. Branson and the other school board members, Mrs. Abernathy, and a dozen others she didn't recognize. "Word spreads fast in Raton," Garrett murmured as he guided her to the front pew. "They've come to show respect." The service was brief but dignified. Reverend Collins, a kind-faced man with silvering hair, spoke of life's journey and the promise of reunion in heaven. Although he had never known Thomas, his words were thoughtful and comforting. When he invited Olivia to say a few words, she found the strength to stand and thank the community for their kindness to a stranger. "My brother believed in new beginnings," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "He came west seeking opportunity and freedom. Though his journey ended too soon, I take comfort knowing he died in pursuit of a better life not just for himself, but for me as well." Afterward, at the small cemetery on the outskirts of town, Thomas was laid to rest beneath a cottonwood tree with a view of the mountains. As the final prayers were spoken, Garrett stood beside Olivia, his solid presence anchoring her against the tide of grief that threatened to overwhelm her. When the other mourners had drifted away, offering final condolences, Olivia remained by the fresh grave, Garrett a respectful distance behind her. "I'd like a moment alone, if you don't mind," she said softly. He nodded, moving away toward the cemetery gate where he stood with his back turned, giving her the privacy she needed for a final goodbye. Kneeling beside the simple wooden marker that bore Thomas's name, Olivia placed a hand on the freshly turned earth. "I'll make you proud, brother," she whispered. "I'll build the life you wanted for me, I promise." When she finally rose and walked back to Garrett, she felt different, as if some weight had shifted within her. The grief remained, but alongside it now was resolve. "I'm ready," she said, and knew she meant more than just leaving the cemetery. The next morning, Olivia moved into the small living quarters at the back of Raton's schoolhouse. The room was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small table with 2 chairs, and a cast-iron stove for cooking and heat. A curtained alcove housed a wardrobe and chest of drawers for her clothes. The single window looked out on a small garden that had clearly been neglected during the school's teacher-less period. "It's not much," Mr. Branson apologized as he handed her the key, "but most teachers find it comfortable enough." "It's perfect," Olivia assured him, already seeing possibilities for making the space her own. After the crowded Frost household in Philadelphia, where privacy had been a luxury, having a place entirely to herself seemed like freedom. The schoolroom itself was a single large space with rows of wooden desks facing a teacher's desk on a slightly raised platform. Slates were stacked neatly in a corner, and a blackboard covered most of the front wall. Bookshelves held a modest collection of readers, arithmetic primers, and history texts. "School begins at 8 and ends at 3, Mr. Branson explained. "Children bring their own midday meal. The town provides firewood for the stove and basic supplies." He hesitated. "We usually give new teachers a week to prepare before starting classes, but with the children having missed so much instruction already." "I can begin tomorrow," Olivia said decisively. "I'll spend today reviewing the texts and preparing lessons." Mr. Branson looked relieved. "Wonderful. I'll spread the word that school resumes tomorrow morning." After he left, Olivia explored her new domain more thoroughly. The previous teacher had left behind lesson plans and attendance records, which would give her a starting point for understanding her pupils' progress. 28 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old, it would be challenging to manage so many different levels, but not impossible. She was making notes at the teacher's desk when a knock at the door interrupted her concentration. Looking up, she was surprised to see Wade Garrett standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Garrett," she said, rising from her chair, "I didn't expect to see you. Thought you might need help settling in," he replied, glancing around the schoolroom. "Place looks better than when I last saw it. Mrs. Abernathy must have sent someone to clean. She mentioned that the Ladies' Aid Society took care of it yesterday," Olivia confirmed. "They left flowers in my quarters as well. Everyone has been so kind." Garrett shifted slightly, seeming uncomfortable in the school setting. "I brought something for you, a housewarming gift of sorts." He reached into his coat and produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. Olivia accepted it, curious. Unwrapping the paper revealed a book, a well-worn copy of Thoreau's Walden. "I noticed you admiring it at the cabin," Garrett explained. "Thought you might like to have it for company." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. "But this is yours." "I couldn't possibly. I've read it more times than I can count," he interrupted. "Besides, I have another copy at the ranch." Olivia ran her fingers over the leather binding, noticing pencil marks in the margins, Garrett's own thoughts and observations recorded as he read. It was a surprisingly intimate gift, a glimpse into his mind that he was choosing to share with her. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll treasure it." He nodded, glancing around the schoolroom again. "You'll do well here. The children in these parts are hungry for learning, even if they don't always show it." "I hope so." Olivia set the book carefully on her desk. "I admit I'm nervous about tomorrow. Teaching children of neighbors in Philadelphia was different from being responsible for an entire school." "You'll manage," Garrett said with a confidence that bolstered her own. "Most of these kids have good hearts, just need firm guidance. The older boys might test you at first, especially the Dawson twins. They gave the last teacher fits." "I'll keep that in mind," Olivia said, smiling at his insider knowledge. "Will you be returning to your ranch now that I'm settled?" A shadow crossed his face. "Soon. Need to check my cattle, mend fences. Been away longer than planned." The thought of him leaving brought an unexpected pang of loss. In the few days she'd known him, Wade Garrett had become her anchor in this new world, the one person who knew her story, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and offered protection without judgment. "I understand," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "You've already done more than I had any right to expect." Garrett studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to read something in her expression. "I'll be back in town in a week or so. Need to bring some cattle to market and purchase supplies." He hesitated. "Perhaps I could call on you then, see how you're faring with the scholars." "I'd like that very much," Olivia replied, unable to hide her pleasure at the prospect. He settled his hat back on his head, seeming satisfied with her response. "Until then, Miss Frost." "Until then, Mr. Garrett." She watched from the schoolhouse door as he mounted his buckskin gelding and rode slowly down the main street toward the mountain trail that would take him home. Only when he had disappeared from sight did Olivia return to her lesson planning, the copy of Walden, a silent reminder of the connection forming between them. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity as Olivia established herself as Raton's schoolteacher. Her first day had been as challenging as expected, the students testing her authority, particularly the Dawson twins, 16-year-old boys who clearly believed themselves too grown for schooling. But Olivia had faced down her father's drunken rages. Two overgrown farm boys held little terror for her. By the end of the first week, she had established clear expectations and begun to connect with her pupils. The younger children responded enthusiastically to her animated reading of stories, while the older ones grudgingly admitted that her geography lessons, enhanced by her recent travels, were more interesting than memorizing state capitals from a book. True to his word, Garrett returned to town 10 days after her arrival. Olivia was teaching arithmetic to the middle group when a shadow fell across the schoolroom door. Looking up, she saw his familiar silhouette, hat in hand, waiting patiently for her to acknowledge him. "Continue with your sums," she instructed her students before crossing to the door. "Mr. Garrett, this is a surprise." "Sorry to interrupt your teaching," he said, his voice low. "Just wanted to see how you were settling in." "We're doing well," Olivia replied, aware of the curious stares from her pupils. "Would you like to join us? I was just explaining fractions." A flash of something like panic crossed his face. "Another time, perhaps. I have business with the blacksmith that can't wait." "Of course." She tried to hide her disappointment. "Perhaps you might call at the school after classes end. I'm usually here until 5 preparing the next day's lessons." Garrett nodded. "I'll come by then." He was as good as his word. At 4:30, after the last student had departed, Olivia heard a knock at the schoolhouse door. Garrett stood there, his expression unreadable as always, but something in his stance suggested tension. "Come in," she invited, gesturing to the chair she'd placed beside her desk. "Would you care for coffee? I was just about to make some." He accepted, and Olivia busied herself with the small stove while he looked around the schoolroom, now decorated with her students' arithmetic papers and hand-drawn maps. "You've made changes," he observed. "Small ones," she agreed, bringing 2 cups of coffee to the desk. "The children respond better when they see their work displayed. It gives them pride in their efforts." Garrett accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. "The Dawson boys are still attending. That's a minor miracle. Their father usually pulls them out for farm work by this time of year." "We reached an understanding," Olivia explained, sitting across from him. "They help the younger children with reading 3 days a week, and I teach them practical mathematics, the kind useful for measuring fields and calculating crop yields, that they can apply directly to their farm work." "Clever," Garrett said with approval. "Most teachers just try to force the same lessons on all students regardless of their needs." "I believe education should be useful as well as enlightening," Olivia said. "These children will have very different lives. Some may leave Raton for cities, others will remain here farming or ranching. My job is to prepare them for whatever path they choose." They discussed the school for a while longer, Garrett sharing insights about the families of various students that helped Olivia understand their circumstances better. His knowledge of the community was surprisingly detailed for a man who claimed to prefer solitude. "You know a great deal about Raton for someone who visits so rarely," she observed. Garrett shrugged. "I listen when I'm here. People talk freely around a man they think isn't paying attention." "And are you paying attention?" His eyes met hers, direct and unguarded for once. "More than most realize." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Olivia couldn't quite name. She found herself studying the lines of his face, the way sunlight and wind had etched character into features that might otherwise have been conventionally handsome. There was something compelling about Wade Garrett, something that drew her despite, or perhaps because of his reserve. "I've been reading your book," she said, breaking the moment. "Your notes in the margins are fascinating. You see things in Thoreau's words that I missed entirely." "Just the observations of a solitary man," he said, seeming almost embarrassed. "Nothing profound." "I disagree." "Your perspective is unique." Olivia hesitated, then added, "I'd like to know more about the man who wrote those notes." Garrett's expression closed slightly. "Not much to tell that would interest a lady like yourself." "Let me be the judge of that," she countered gently. "You know my story, the circumstances that brought me here. Yet I know very little about you except that you fought for the Union, your mother was a teacher, and you prefer mountains to towns." For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then he sighed, setting down his coffee cup. "What would you like to know, Miss Frost?" "Whatever you're willing to share," she replied. "Where you were born, How you came to New Mexico. Why a man who clearly values knowledge lives so far from others. Garrett was quiet for so long that Olivia began to regret her questions. Just as she was about to apologize, he began to speak. I was born in Missouri, a small town near Springfield. My father owned a modest farm, grew mostly corn and some tobacco. Mother taught at the local school until I came along, then took in students at home while raising me. His voice took on a softer quality when speaking of his mother. She was educated back east somewhere, Massachusetts, I think. Never did understand how she ended up marrying a Missouri farmer, but they seemed happy enough. He paused, seeming to consider how much more to reveal. When the war came, Missouri was torn apart, neighbor against neighbor. My father refused to take sides, said the war was political folly that would only bring suffering. He was right, but neutrality wasn't an option for long. Confederate sympathizers burned our barn as a warning. Olivia could hear the old pain in his voice. What happened? Father sent Mother and me east to her family while he stayed to protect the farm. I was 15 then, old enough to understand what was happening but too young to do anything about it. His jaw tightened. 2 months later, word came that he'd been shot as a suspected Union informant. Whether he was or wasn't never mattered to me, he was dead either way. I'm so sorry, Olivia said softly. Garrett acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. I ran away from my mother's family home, lied about my age, and joined the Union cavalry. Spent 3 years fighting, most of it in Tennessee and Georgia. By the time it ended, I was 18 going on 50, with nightmares I couldn't shake and no taste for returning to Missouri. And your mother? Died of typhoid while I was away fighting. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Olivia sensed the depths of grief beneath the control. I didn't learn of it until after Appomattox. Her brother wrote me a letter that took months to find me. So you came west, Olivia said, understanding better now. Not right away, drifted for a while. Worked cattle drives, tried prospecting in Colorado, took odd jobs where I could find them. Nothing felt right until I reached these mountains. He gestured toward the window where the Sangre de Cristo Range dominated the western horizon. Something about the vastness, the solitude. It quiets the memories. The pain in his voice was so familiar, the same hollowness she'd felt after Thomas's death, the same disorientation of being utterly alone in the world. Without thinking, Olivia reached across the desk and placed her hand over his. Thank you for telling me, she said simply. Garrett looked down at their hands, surprise flickering across his features. For a heartbeat, Olivia feared she'd overstepped, but then he turned his palm upward, his calloused fingers curling gently around hers. You're easy to talk to, Miss Frost, he said quietly. Too easy, perhaps. Before she could respond, he withdrew his hand and stood. It's getting late. I should let you finish your work. Olivia rose as well, oddly reluctant to see him go. Will you be in town long, leaving at first light tomorrow? He replied. Need to move the rest of my herd to summer pasture before the weather turns. I see. She tried to keep disappointment from her voice. When might you return? Garrett considered the question. Mid-June, likely. That's when I usually bring the first calves to market. Nearly a month then. He studied her face. Would it trouble you if I wrote? Nothing important, just correspondence. The request surprised and pleased her. I would like that very much, Mr. Garrett. Then I'll send word when I can. He settled his hat back on his head, pausing at the door. Take care, Miss Frost. And you, Mr. Garrett. After he left, Olivia sat for a long time at her desk, considering the man who had shared more of himself in an hour than he likely had in years. There was something beginning between them, something tentative and fragile, but real nonetheless. Whether it was merely friendship or something deeper remained to be seen, but for the first time since Thomas's death, Olivia found herself looking toward the future with anticipation rather than dread. May passed in a flurry of activity as Olivia settled fully into her role as Raton's schoolteacher. The days grew warmer, wildflowers carpeted the hillsides, and the rhythm of small-town life began to feel familiar. She joined the church choir, attended the Ladies' Aid Society meetings at Mrs. Abernathy's urging, and gradually came to know her neighbors beyond their relationship as parents of her students. True to his word, Garrett wrote to her. His first letter arrived 2 weeks after his departure, delivered by a ranch hand bringing supplies from the mountains. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper, the handwriting neat and precise. Miss Frost, spring has come to the high country. Wild iris blooming in the meadow below the cabin. Spotted a bear with 2 cubs yesterday near the eastern fence line. Reminded me of young Billy Evans struggling with arithmetic while his sister Sarah races ahead. Some learn at their own pace, I suppose. The book you lent me, Emerson's Essays, provides good company in the evenings. His thoughts on self-reliance resonate, though I question his optimism about human nature. Perhaps you will share your perspective when next we meet. Hope this finds you well and the scholars behaving themselves. Respectfully, W. Garrett. It was not a love letter by any measure, no flowery sentiments or declarations of feeling. Yet Olivia read it 3 times, appreciating the careful observations and the glimpse into his daily life. The mention of her students showed he had been paying attention during their conversations, while his comments on Emerson invited intellectual exchange. She wrote back the same day, describing her progress with the school, sharing anecdotes about her students' achievements, and offering her thoughts on Emerson's essays. At the end, almost as an afterthought, she added, "The nights here are growing warmer, but I still find myself watching the shadows sometimes, remembering your promise to keep watch until morning. It brings comfort, knowing there are still people in this world who keep their word." Their correspondence continued through May and into June, brief letters exchanged whenever Garrett sent a ranch hand to town for supplies. Through these exchanges, Olivia came to know him better than she might have through casual conversation. On paper, he was more forthcoming, sharing observations about nature, commenting on books they had both read, even revealing occasional glimpses of dry humor that surprised and delighted her. In one letter, he mentioned an abandoned eagle's nest he'd found while checking his northern pasture. The next delivery included a perfect eagle feather wrapped carefully in tissue paper. Another time, he wrote about a mountain stream where trout gathered in a deep pool. The following week, Mrs. Abernathy's cook served Olivia fresh trout for dinner, saying, "Mr. Garrett asked me to prepare this for you, miss. Said you might enjoy a change from the usual fare." These thoughtful gestures, combined with his letters, painted a picture of a man far more complex than the taciturn mountain dweller most townspeople saw. By the time June arrived, Olivia found herself watching the road from the mountains whenever she walked to and from school, hoping for a glimpse of a rider on a buckskin gelding. Her anticipation didn't go unnoticed. "Mr. Garrett should be bringing cattle to market any day now," Mrs. Abernathy remarked one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch after dinner. "I imagine you'll be glad to see him." Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "We've become friends through our correspondence," she acknowledged. "It will be nice to continue our discussions in person." Mrs. Abernathy's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Friends, is it? Well, friendship can be a fine foundation for more enduring relationships." "You're getting ahead of yourself," Olivia protested, though the idea had crossed her mind more than once. "Mr. Garrett values his solitude. I doubt he's looking for entanglements." "Perhaps not before," the widow conceded, but a man doesn't ride 30 miles to deliver a single trout to a lady he considers merely a friend. Before Olivia could formulate a response, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the street. A group of riders was passing, trail dusty and weary-looking. Leading them on a familiar buckskin gelding was Wade Garrett, his hat pulled low against the setting sun. Olivia's heart quickened as the group neared the boarding house. Garrett spotted her on the porch and reined in his horse, touching his hat in greeting. "Miss Frost, Mrs. Abernathy, evening to you both." "Mr. Garrett," Mrs. Abernathy called cheerfully, "just in time for supper. Rosa made her famous beef stew, and there's plenty to spare if you and your men are hungry." "Much obliged, madam, but we need to get these cattle settled at the stockyards first. Been on the trail since dawn." His eyes shifted to Olivia. "Perhaps tomorrow if the invitation stands." "Of course," Mrs. Abernathy assured him. "You're always welcome at my table." Garrett nodded his thanks, his gaze lingering on Olivia for a moment longer before he signaled to his men to continue on. As they rode away, Mrs. Abernathy gave a soft chuckle. "Not interested in entanglements, indeed," she murmured. "The man couldn't take his eyes off you." "He was being polite," Olivia insisted, though her pulse still raced from the brief encounter. "Besides, I'm sure he's exhausted from the trail. We all look different through the lens of fatigue." Mrs. Abernathy just smiled and returned to her knitting, apparently content to let the matter rest for now. The following evening, true to his word, Garrett appeared at the boarding house promptly at 6, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes, not formal attire, but noticeably more polished than his usual trail garb. He'd brought a small bouquet of wildflowers, which he presented to Mrs. Abernathy with thanks for her hospitality. "These are lovely," the widow exclaimed, arranging them in a vase. "I don't recognize some of these blooms." "Alpine flowers," Garrett explained. "They grow only in the high meadows. Thought you might enjoy something different for your table." Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Mrs. Abernathy skillfully keeping the conversation flowing. She inquired about conditions in the high country, the health of Garrett's cattle, and the prospects for summer rain, safe topics that allowed him to speak easily while avoiding personal matters. It was only after the meal, when Mrs. Abernathy excused herself with transparent hints about needing to help Rosa in the kitchen, that Olivia found herself alone with Garrett in the boarding house parlor. "Your letters have been most welcome," she said once they were seated in the twin armchairs beside the unlit fireplace. "I've enjoyed our exchanges." "As have I." Garrett looked slightly uncomfortable in the formal setting, his large frame seeming out of place among the delicate furnishings. "Though I fear my correspondence lacks the refinement you're accustomed to." "Not at all," Olivia assured him. "Your observations are thoughtful and your insights genuine. I prefer that to empty pleasantries or forced eloquence." He seemed pleased by her assessment. "How fares the school?" "Term ends soon, doesn't it?" "Next week," she confirmed. "Though I'll be teaching a smaller summer session for those who wish to continue their studies. About half the children will attend, mostly those whose parents value education over additional farm hands." "You've made an impression on this town," Garrett said. "I hear good things from everyone, even old man Dawson, who swore no teacher would ever get his boys to take schooling seriously." "The boys just needed to see the practical application of what they're learning," Olivia explained. "They're actually quite bright when they apply themselves." They talked easily for a while about the school, the town, and the books they'd both been reading. As the conversation flowed, Garrett gradually relaxed, his posture becoming less rigid, his responses more animated. Olivia found herself studying the changes in his expression. As he spoke about things that interested him, the slight crease between his brows when he was considering a point, the rare but transformative smile that appeared when something amused him. "You're staring, Miss Frost," he observed during a lull in the conversation. "Do I have food on my face?" Heat rose in Olivia's cheeks. "Not at all. I was just noticing how different you seem when you're relaxed, less guarded." He looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Don't have much practice with social calls," he admitted. "Usually only come to town for necessities. Yet you came tonight," Olivia pointed out softly, "and you've written regularly these past weeks." Garrett held her gaze, something shifting in his sea-gray eyes. "Some necessities aren't sold at the mercantile," he said quietly. The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. Olivia's heart fluttered, but before she could respond, Mrs. Abernathy returned with coffee and apple pie, effectively ending the moment of privacy. Later, as Garrett prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "I'll be in town for a few days, seeing to business at the stockyards. Perhaps you would permit me to call on you again." "I would like that," Olivia replied. "Perhaps you could visit the school tomorrow. The children would enjoy meeting the man who helped build their schoolhouse." Something like alarm flashed across his features. "I'm not much good with children. Wouldn't know what to say to them." "Just answer their questions honestly," Olivia suggested. "They're curious about everything, especially how people live in the mountains." Garrett considered the invitation. "If you think it would be worthwhile." "I do," she assured him. "Come at 2 o'clock. We'll be discussing local geography. Your perspective would be valuable." To her surprise and pleasure, he agreed, though his expression suggested he was already regretting the commitment. The following afternoon, Garrett arrived at the schoolhouse precisely at 2, his discomfort evident as he removed his hat and entered the classroom of suddenly silent children. Olivia had warned her pupils that a special visitor would be joining them, but she hadn't mentioned who. Now, 28 pairs of curious eyes fixed on the tall stranger who seemed to fill the doorway. "Class, this is Mr. Garrett," Olivia introduced him. "He's a rancher who lives in the mountains west of town, and he's graciously agreed to speak with us about the geography of our region." "Is it true you fought Indians, Mr. Garrett?" blurted one of the Dawson twins before Olivia could continue. "Ethan Dawson," she reprimanded. "That's not an appropriate—" "No, it's a fair question," Garrett interrupted, surprising her. He moved to stand beside her desk, addressing the class directly. "I've had disagreements with some Apache and Comanche in my time, but mostly we respect each other's territories. Fighting usually happens when someone breaks an agreement or crosses a boundary they shouldn't." "Have you ever shot a bear?" asked another boy eagerly. "Only when necessary, for food or protection," Garrett replied. "Bears generally avoid humans if given the choice. Most dangerous animals in these mountains are the two-legged kind." This prompted a flurry of questions about outlaws and bandits, which Garrett fielded with surprising patience. Gradually, his initial stiffness eased as he engaged with the children's curiosity. When Olivia spread a map of the territory across her desk, he pointed out features that weren't marked: hidden valleys, seasonal creeks, old trails used by native tribes. "This ridge here," he indicated, tracing a line on the map, "divides 2 watersheds. Rain falling on the east side eventually reaches the Canadian River, while the west side feeds the Rio Grande." The children clustered around the desk, fascinated as Garrett explained how the mountain geography affected weather patterns, plant growth, and animal migration. He described the different types of trees found at various elevations, the wildflowers that bloomed in sequence from spring through fall, and the signs that predicted harsh winters or drought summers. "How do you know all this stuff?" asked Sarah Evans, one of Olivia's brightest pupils. Observation, Garrett replied simply. When you live close to the land, you learn to read it like you read your school books. The mountains tell their own stories if you pay attention. By the time the school day ended, Garrett had won over even the most skeptical students with his knowledge and straightforward manner. As the children filed out, many thanked him personally for his visit, several extracting promises that he would return to tell them more about mountain life. When the last pupil had departed, Olivia turned to him with a smile. "You were wonderful. I've never seen Ethan Dawson so engaged in a geography lesson." Garrett looked both pleased and embarrassed by her praise. "They're good kids. Ask smart questions." "They do when they're interested in the subject," Olivia agreed. "You have a natural gift for teaching, you know. You explain things clearly without talking down to them." "Had a good example in my mother," he said, helping her gather the maps and materials they'd used. She believed children were just small adults who hadn't learned everything yet, not lesser beings to be controlled. A wise perspective. Olivia hesitated, then added, "Would you care to stay for coffee? I usually take a cup while preparing the next day's lessons." Garrett accepted, and they settled into what was becoming a comfortable routine, Olivia making coffee, while he built a small fire in the stove to ward off the late afternoon chill. As they sat at her desk with steaming cups, Olivia found herself studying him again, noticing how the afternoon sunlight through the windows caught the silver strands in his hair. "You're staring again, Miss Frost," he observed, though this time his tone held a hint of amusement rather than discomfort. "Olivia," she said suddenly. "When we're alone, I'd like you to call me Olivia." Surprise flickered across his features, followed by something warmer. "Olivia," he repeated, as if testing the sound of her name. "Then you must call me Wade." "Wade," she echoed, liking the simple, strong sound of it. "It suits you." A brief smile touched his lips. "My father chose it, said he wanted a name that couldn't be shortened or made fancy." "Your father sounds like a practical man." He was. Wade's expression grew distant. "Practical, honest, stubborn as the day is long. We butted heads often, especially as I got older, after he died. Well, there were things I wished I'd said while I had the chance." Olivia understood that regret all too well. "I feel the same about Thomas. There's so much left unsaid between us." "That's the hardest part of losing someone," Wade agreed. "The conversations you'll never have." They were quiet for a moment, each lost in memories of those they'd lost. Then Olivia said softly, "Perhaps that's why I value our conversations so much. They remind me that new connections are still possible, even after loss." Wade's eyes met hers, something unguarded and vulnerable in their depths. "I've spent 8 years avoiding connections, thinking solitude was safer. Then you appeared at my cabin door and suddenly—" He trailed off, seeming unsure how to continue. "Suddenly what?" Olivia prompted gently. "Suddenly the silence felt emptier than before," he finished, his voice low. The admission hung between them, simple yet profound. Olivia reached across the desk, offering her hand as she had once before. This time, Wade took it without hesitation, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with careful strength. "I'm glad you were there that night," she whispered. "I'm glad it was your cabin I found." "So am I," he replied. His thumb traced a light pattern across her knuckles, the small gesture conveying more than words could express. They might have remained that way longer, but a knock at the schoolhouse door interrupted the moment. Wade released her hand as Sheriff Hodges stepped inside, looking apologetic for the intrusion. "Sorry to disturb you, Miss Frost, Garrett," the lawman said, nodding to them both. "Got some news I thought you'd want to hear right away." "What is it, Sheriff?" Olivia asked, noticing the grim satisfaction in the man's expression. "We got him," Hodges announced. The Keller gang. Army patrol caught them trying to rob a stagecoach near Trinidad yesterday, all four of them, including Keller himself. He looked directly at Olivia. They're being brought to Raton tomorrow. We'll need you to identify them as the men who killed your brother. The news should have brought relief, but instead, Olivia felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The prospect of facing her brother's killers, of reliving that terrible day through testimony, filled her with dread. "Do I have to see them?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "Afraid so, miss," Hodges said sympathetically. "Need a positive identification for the charges to stick. The circuit judge arrives next week, and we want these men tried and sentenced proper-like." Wade's expression had hardened at the sheriff's news. "I'll accompany Miss Frost," he stated rather than offered. "What time tomorrow?" "Bringing them in around noon," Hodges replied. "Appreciate your support, Garrett. This won't be easy for the lady." After the sheriff departed, Olivia sat in stunned silence, the coffee forgotten before her. The idea of confronting the bandits, seeing the faces that had haunted her nightmares, was overwhelming. "You don't have to do this alone," Wade said quietly. "I'll be with you." "I thought it was over," she whispered. "I thought I could just move forward." "Sometimes the past demands a reckoning before it releases us," he replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Facing these men, seeing justice done for Thomas, it might help lay some ghosts to rest." Olivia nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence. "Will you truly stay? Through the identification, the trial?" "As long as you need me," Wade promised, and in his eyes she read the same determination she'd seen that first night when he'd said, "Then I'll keep watch till morning." Some promises, Olivia was beginning to understand, ran deeper than the words themselves. The following day dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect June morning that should have lifted Olivia's spirits. Instead, anxiety knotted her stomach as she dressed in her most formal attire, a navy blue dress with a high collar and modest bustle, her hair arranged neatly beneath a small hat. If she must face her brother's killers, she would do so with dignity. School had been dismissed for the day, Mr. Branson having suggested the children be spared the spectacle of armed prisoners being brought into town. Olivia was grateful for his consideration, though part of her wished for the distraction of teaching rather than waiting for the dreaded confrontation. At 11:30, Wade arrived at the schoolhouse, where Olivia had been attempting to focus on lesson plans. He wore a clean white shirt under his usual vest, his revolver holstered at his hip, not his trail clothes, but not formal wear either. Practical attire for a potentially volatile situation. "You look pale," he observed, concern evident in his eyes. "Did you eat this morning?" Olivia shook her head. "I couldn't. My stomach is in knots." Without comment, Wade reached into his coat pocket and produced an apple and a small parcel wrapped in waxed paper. "Mrs. Abernathy sent these. Said to make sure you had something in your stomach before heading to the sheriff's office." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, both Mrs. Abernathy's and Wade's, brought unexpected tears to Olivia's eyes. She blinked them back, accepting the simple meal with a murmured thanks. As she ate the apple and biscuit, Wade moved to the window, looking out at the main street where a small crowd had begun to gather. "Word spread about the gang being brought in," he reported. "Hodges has deputies keeping folks back from the jail. Should be orderly enough." "Will they be in chains?" Olivia asked, hating how her voice trembled. Wade turned back to her, his expression grave. "Yes, these men are dangerous, Olivia. They've killed before and they'd kill again if given the chance. The chains are necessary." She nodded, drawing a deep breath to steady herself. "I'm ready," she said, though she felt anything but. "Let's get this over with." The walk to the sheriff's office seemed both interminably long and far too short. Wade stayed close beside her, his solid presence a barrier between Olivia and the curious stares of townspeople who had gathered to witness the arrival of the notorious bandits. She could hear their whispers as she passed. "That's the school teacher. Her brother was killed. She's the only witness." The sheriff met them on the steps of his office, his expression solemn. "Army patrol should be here any minute," he informed them. "We'll bring the prisoners in through the back, one at a time. All you need to do is look at each man and tell me if you recognize him from the stage robbery." Simple as that. Simple, Olivia thought bitterly. There was nothing simple about facing the men who had gunned down Thomas in cold blood. As if sensing her distress, Wade moved closer, his arm just touching hers. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're not alone in this." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention. A group of uniformed cavalry soldiers appeared at the end of the street, escorting 4 men on horseback. The prisoners rode with hands shackled before them, their feet bound beneath their horses' bellies. Even at a distance, Olivia could make out the distinctive silver concho hatband on one man, Keller himself. The crowd parted as the soldiers guided their charges toward the rear of the jail. Sheriff Hodges gestured for Olivia and Wade to follow him inside, where they would await the prisoners in his office rather than on the street. "No need to make a spectacle of this," he explained. "You've been through enough already." The next hour was among the most difficult of Olivia's life. One by one, the bandits were brought into the sheriff's office, first the 3 followers, then Keller himself. Each was made to stand against the wall while Olivia, seated beside Wade, was asked if she recognized them. The first man, young, barely older than the Dawson twins, with a sneer that didn't quite hide his fear, she identified as one of the lookouts during the robbery. The second, a burly man with a distinctive scar across his cheek, she remembered as the one who had shot the stage driver. The third, older than the others with a Texas drawl just as she recalled, had been the one to search the passengers for valuables. And then Keller entered, his hands and feet still chained but his bearing arrogant despite his captivity. He wore the silver concho hatband pushed back on his forehead, his dark eyes calculating as they swept over Olivia. "This one," Keller drawled before she could speak. "This pretty little thing is the one that got away." His gaze shifted to Wade, standing protectively beside Olivia's chair. "Found yourself a protector, did you, darlin'? Smart move. Woman alone out here. All sorts of dangers lurking about." Wade took a half step forward, his hand dropping to his revolver, but Sheriff Hodges intervened. "That's enough out of you, Keller. Miss Frost, is this the man who led the robbery?" "The one who shot your brother." Olivia forced herself to look directly at Keller, refusing to show fear despite the cold dread his presence inspired. "Yes," she said clearly. "This is the man who killed Thomas. He wore that same hatband. I remember the silver catching the sunlight just before he fired." Keller's smirk faltered slightly at her steady testimony. "You got a good memory, lady," he said, an edge creeping into his voice. "Too good, maybe. Get him out of here," Hodges ordered the deputies flanking the prisoner. "Back to his cell. The judge arrives Monday, and I want these 4 ready for trial." As Keller was led away, he called over his shoulder, "See you in court, Miss Frost. Looking forward to our next meeting." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air after the door closed behind him. Sheriff Hodges shook his head grimly. "Don't you worry about his talk, Miss Frost. He'll be under heavy guard until the trial, and after that, he'll swing for what he's done. We have witnesses from 3 different stage robberies, not just yours." Olivia nodded mechanically, feeling suddenly drained. The confrontation had taken more from her than she'd expected, not just energy but something deeper, as if facing these men had reopened wounds she'd thought were beginning to heal. Wade must have noticed her pallor. "I'm taking Miss Frost home now," he told the sheriff. "She's done her part. If you need anything further, you can find me at the boarding house." Outside, the crowd had mostly dispersed, their curiosity satisfied by the arrival of the notorious outlaws. Wade led Olivia away from the jail, but instead of turning toward the schoolhouse or boarding house, he guided her to the small church at the edge of town. The building was empty at this hour, cool and quiet with sunlight streaming through simple stained glass windows. "Thought you might need a moment of peace," he explained as they sat in a rear pew. "Crowds and questions can wait." Olivia was grateful for his perceptiveness. The church's tranquil atmosphere helped calm her racing thoughts, gradually easing the tension that had gripped her since the sheriff's announcement. "He threatened me," she said after several minutes of silence. "Keller, he as good as promised to seek revenge." "Empty words from a condemned man," Wade assured her. "He'll never leave that jail except to meet the hangman." "You don't know that," Olivia insisted. "The trial might not go as expected. Witnesses change their stories. Evidence disappears. What if Olivia—" Wade took her hands in his, turning on the pew to face her directly. "Listen to me. That man will never harm you. I won't allow it." The fierce certainty in his voice steadied her. "You can't stand guard forever," she said, though her protest lacked conviction. "I can for as long as necessary," he countered. "Besides, after Monday, the threat will be gone for good. Judge Preston doesn't show mercy to stage robbers and murderers." Olivia wanted to believe him. She needed to believe that the men who had taken her brother would face justice, that the law would protect her from Keller's threats. But a lifetime of disappointments, her father's broken promises, society's blind eye to her mother's suffering, even Thomas's death, despite all their careful planning, had taught her that justice was rarely certain and protection never guaranteed. As if reading her thoughts, Wade added softly, "Trust me, Olivia. I kept my promise before. I'll keep it again." She looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of doubt or false reassurance. There was none, only the same steady resolve she'd come to associate with Wade Garrett. "I do trust you," she admitted, realizing as she spoke that it was true. Despite the briefness of their acquaintance, despite the emotional upheaval of recent weeks, she trusted this quiet, honorable man more than anyone she'd known since Thomas. Something shifted in Wade's expression at her words, a softening, a lowering of guards long maintained. His hands tightened slightly around hers. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice low and serious. "Something I've been considering since yesterday." Olivia's heart quickened. "What is it?" "After the trial, I'm planning to return to my ranch," he began. "Summer's the busiest season, and I've already stayed in town longer than intended." Disappointment washed over her, though she tried to hide it. "Of course, you have responsibilities." "Let me finish," he said gently. "What I'm trying to say poorly, it seems, is that I'd like you to visit the ranch, see where I live, the life I've built there." The invitation surprised her. "You want me to visit your home?" Wade nodded, a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "It's not what you're accustomed to, simpler than town life, more isolated. But it's peaceful, especially in summer. The meadows fill with wildflowers and the creek runs clear as glass." The way he described it, with genuine love for his mountain refuge, made Olivia curious to see this place that had healed something broken in him after the war. "I would like that," she said truthfully, "when the trial is over and school is closed for the summer." Relief and something warmer flickered in his eyes. "Good, that's good." He released her hands, seeming suddenly self-conscious about their prolonged contact in the church. "We should head back. People will talk if we're absent too long." Olivia almost laughed at his concern for propriety. They were sitting in a church, After all, but she understood. In a small town like Raton, reputations were fragile things, especially for a schoolteacher and a woman alone. As they walked back toward the boarding house, Wade kept a proper distance between them, though his protective watchfulness never wavered. Several townspeople greeted them, offering words of support to Olivia and approval to Wade for standing by the schoolmarm in her time of need. As one elderly shopkeeper put it, by evening, Olivia's nerves had settled enough that she could join Mrs. Abernathy and Wade for dinner, though she ate little. The conversation carefully avoided mention of the outlaws or the upcoming trial, focusing instead on pleasanter topics: the summer weather, plans for the town's Independence Day celebration, news from distant relatives in Mrs. Abernathy's latest letters. After dinner, Wade excused himself earlier than usual. "Need to check on my cattle at the stockyards," he explained. "They'll be sold at auction tomorrow, and I want to ensure they're properly watered for the night." At the door, he paused. "I'll return in the morning," he told Olivia. "No need to go to the school if you're not feeling up to it. The children would understand." "Teaching will help keep my mind occupied," she replied. "I'll be fine, truly." He studied her face, seeming to assess her determination, then nodded. "Very well, but I'll escort you there and back, just as a precaution." The precaution continued through the following days as Wade appointed himself Olivia's unofficial guardian. He walked her to and from school, arranged for one of his ranch hands to watch the schoolhouse during teaching hours, and spent evenings at the boarding house, often reading quietly while Olivia prepared lessons or graded students' work. His constant presence should have felt intrusive or controlling, but instead, Olivia found it reassuring. Wade was never overbearing, never restricted her movements or decisions. He was simply there, a steady presence between her and potential danger, just as he had promised. By Sunday evening, the eve of the trial, tension in the town had risen to palpable levels. The circuit judge had arrived that afternoon, and rumors circulated that the proceedings would be swift, the sentences carried out immediately afterward. Olivia, who would be called to testify, spent the evening in prayer at the church service, seeking strength for the ordeal ahead. Wade sat beside her in the pew, respectful of her faith, though he admitted later that he hadn't set foot in a church since his mother's funeral. "Something about formal religion doesn't sit right with me anymore," he explained as they walked back to the boarding house. "Found more truth in mountaintops than pulpits, I suppose." "Yet you came tonight," Olivia observed. He glanced down at her, his expression softening in the twilight. "Some things matter more than personal comfort." The simple statement, so characteristic of Wade's straightforward nature, touched Olivia deeply. Here was a man who lived by his convictions, who did what he believed right regardless of convenience or custom. In a world of shifting loyalties and expedient morality, his steadfastness was rare and precious. At the boarding house steps, Wade paused. "Try to rest tonight," he advised. "Tomorrow will be difficult, but it will also be an ending. After the trial, after justice is done, you can truly begin to move forward." "Will you be there, in the courtroom?" Olivia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Front row," he promised, "the whole time." She impulsively reached for his hand, squeezing it briefly before propriety demanded she release it. "Thank you, Wade, for everything." He touched his hat, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. "Sleep well, Olivia." But sleep proved elusive that night. Olivia tossed in her bed at the boarding house, her mind replaying the stage robbery, imagining the trial ahead, wondering if she would have the courage to face Keller again and recount her brother's death before a crowded courtroom. Outside her window, the night was unusually dark, clouds obscuring the moon and stars. Shadows seemed to gather in the corners of her room, reminding her of those first fearful nights after arriving in Raton. Though she was no longer actively afraid of the dark, there were moments like now when old anxieties resurfaced. Rising from her restless bed, Olivia moved to the window, drawing aside the curtain to look down at the quiet street below. A figure stood there in the shadows of a large oak tree, familiar in outline, patient in posture. Wade, keeping his silent vigil as promised. The sight of him brought an unexpected lump to her throat. He had meant it literally. She realized, "I'll keep watch till morning." Not just that first night in his cabin, but now, when she faced the darkness of memory and fear. Olivia pressed her hand to the cool glass, a wordless gesture he couldn't see, but that somehow steadied her nonetheless. Then she returned to her bed, and this time, sleep came swiftly, carrying her peacefully through till dawn. The courthouse was packed to capacity for the trial of the Keller gang. It seemed every resident of Raton and surrounding ranches had come to witness justice being served. Judge Preston, a stern-faced man with a reputation for harsh but fair verdicts, presided from the bench with an air of experienced authority. Olivia sat in the front row as promised, with Wade beside her and Sheriff Hodges on her other side. The proceedings began with formal charges being read: multiple counts of robbery, assault, and in Thomas's case, murder. When Olivia's turn came to testify, Wade gave her hand a brief, reassuring squeeze before she rose to take the witness stand. Under the prosecutor's gentle questioning, she recounted the events of that terrible day: the stagecoach journey, the sudden attack, Thomas's attempt to protect her, and his brutal murder at Keller's hands. Throughout her testimony, she kept her eyes fixed on the judge, avoiding Keller's stare from the defendant's bench. Her voice remained steady, her memory clear and precise. When the defense attorney attempted to suggest she might have mistaken Keller for one of his men in the chaos of the robbery, Olivia firmly described the distinctive silver hatband that had identified him as the shooter. "And you're certain it was this man, the defendant John Keller, who fired the shot that killed your brother?" the prosecutor asked for clarification. "I am absolutely certain," Olivia stated, finally allowing herself to look directly at Keller. "I will never forget his face or his actions that day." Keller's expression darkened at her unwavering testimony, but he remained silent, aware that outbursts would only harm his already tenuous defense. After Olivia stepped down, other witnesses were called: passengers from previous robberies, an army sergeant who had participated in the capture, the doctor who had examined Thomas's body. The evidence mounted inexorably, leaving little doubt of the gang's guilt. By late afternoon, the jury had reached its verdict: guilty on all counts. Judge Preston wasted no time in pronouncing sentence. "John Keller, Daniel Marsh, Samuel Trent, and William Cooper, you have been found guilty of multiple robberies, assault upon innocent travelers, and the cold-blooded murder of Thomas Frost. The sentence of this court is that you be hanged by the neck until dead." He fixed each man with a stern glare. "The sentence will be carried out at dawn tomorrow. May God have mercy on your souls." A murmur ran through the courtroom at the swiftness of the judgment, though few seemed surprised. Justice in the territories moved quickly when the evidence was clear and the crime severe. As the prisoners were led away, Keller turned, his eyes finding Olivia in the crowd. "This ain't over, schoolteacher," he called out before the deputies could silence him. "Not by a long shot." Wade was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between Olivia and the condemned man. Sheriff Hodges stepped forward as well, his hand on his revolver. "Empty threats from a desperate man," the sheriff said loudly enough for all to hear. "He'll trouble no one after tomorrow." Outside the courthouse, townspeople pressed around Olivia, offering condolences and congratulations on the verdict. Wade stayed close, his protective instincts clearly heightened by Keller's final threat. When the crowd finally dispersed, he insisted on escorting Olivia directly to the boarding house rather than returning to the school as she had planned. "The children's lessons can wait one more day," he said firmly. "You've been through enough for now." Too drained to argue, Olivia allowed herself to be guided back to Mrs. Abernathy's, where the widow had prepared a light meal and hot tea. Wade remained through dinner, but excused himself shortly after, explaining that he needed to speak with Sheriff Hodges about security arrangements for the night. "You're worried about Keller," Olivia observed as he prepared to leave. "Even though he's in jail, sentenced to hang." Wade's expression was grave. "I don't trust desperate men, and Keller's as desperate as they come. The jail's secure enough, but I'll sleep better knowing extra eyes are watching tonight." "You're not planning to stand guard outside my window again, are you?" she asked, having noticed him the previous night. A flicker of surprise crossed his features. "You saw me." "I couldn't sleep," Olivia admitted. "When I looked out, you were there." She hesitated, then added, "It helped knowing you were watching. I slept after that." Something softened in Wade's expression. "Then I'll be there again tonight," he said simply. "Get some rest, Olivia. By this time tomorrow, this will all be behind you." But events were not to unfold as planned. Shortly after midnight, Olivia was awakened by shouting in the street and the sound of running feet. Pulling on a robe, she rushed to her window in time to see men with lanterns hurrying toward the jail, Sheriff Hodges at their head. A moment later, the church bell began to toll, not the measured rings that marked the hour, but rapid, urgent peals that signaled emergency. From her vantage point, Olivia could see Wade emerging from the shadows below her window, moving swiftly to intercept the sheriff as he passed. The two men conversed briefly, Hodges gesticulating with obvious agitation while Wade listened intently. Then both turned and ran toward the jail, drawing their weapons as they went. Heart pounding, Olivia hastily dressed and made her way downstairs, where she found Mrs. Abernathy already in the parlor, a shotgun across her lap. "What's happening?" Olivia asked, alarmed by the widow's armed presence. "Jailbreak," Mrs. Abernathy replied grimly. "Someone attacked the deputy on night watch near, killed him, and helped Keller escape. The other three are still locked up, but Keller's loose with at least one accomplice." Cold dread washed over Olivia. "Keller escaped?" Mrs. Abernathy nodded, her expression unusually fierce. "Sheriff's organizing search parties. Half the town's men are out looking already." She patted the shotgun. "Meanwhile, I'm keeping watch here. No one's getting past my door tonight, especially not that murdering scoundrel." The widow's determination would have been reassuring under normal circumstances, but Olivia knew Keller's threat had been directed specifically at her. If he'd escaped, if he was free in Raton with revenge on his mind. "Wade was outside," she said, moving toward the front door. "I need to find him." Mrs. Abernathy rose swiftly, blocking her path. "You'll do no such thing, young lady. That's exactly what Keller would want you out there in the dark, vulnerable. No, you'll stay right here where it's safe." "But Wade Garrett can handle himself," the widow said firmly. "Best way you can help is by staying put, so he doesn't have to worry about your safety while hunting Keller." The logic was sound, but it did nothing to ease Olivia's rising panic. The thought of Wade out there, facing a desperate killer in the darkness, filled her with a terror far greater than any concern for her own safety. The next hours were among the longest of Olivia's life. She and Mrs. Abernathy took turns watching at the windows while the other tried to rest, though sleep was impossible for either woman. Periodically, They heard shouts or gunfire in the distance, signs that the search continued throughout the night. Dawn came with no news and no resolution. When the church bells tolled 6 the hour when Keller had been scheduled to hang, Olivia felt sick with dread. Where was Wade? Why hadn't he returned or sent word? At 7, a knock at the door brought both women to their feet. Mrs. Abernathy raised her shotgun while Olivia cautiously approached the entrance. "Who's there?" the widow called sharply. "Sheriff Hodges, madam. Got news for Miss Frost." Relief flooded Olivia as she recognized the lawman's voice. She unlocked the door to find not only Sheriff Hodges but also Wade standing on the porch. His clothes were dusty. There was a bruise forming along his jaw, and weariness lined his face, but he was blessedly, wonderfully alive. "You're hurt," she said, reaching toward him instinctively. "It's nothing," he assured her, catching her hand briefly before propriety reasserted itself. "Just a scuffle during the search." Sheriff Hodges removed his hat as he entered. "Got good news and bad news, Miss Frost. The good news is Keller's been dealt with. He won't trouble anyone ever again." "You found him?" Mrs. Abernathy asked, lowering her shotgun. "Garrett here tracked him to an abandoned cabin north of town," Hodges explained. "Keller and his accomplice, turns out it was his brother from Trinidad, were planning to circle back for revenge before heading to the territories. They didn't count on Garrett's tracking skills or determination." "What happened?" Olivia asked, her eyes on Wade's face. "There was a confrontation," Wade said quietly. "Keller drew first. I was faster." The simple statement conveyed everything necessary. John Keller was dead, justice delivered not by the court's hangman but by Wade Garrett's bullet. "And the brother?" Mrs. Abernathy inquired. "Wounded but alive," Hodges replied. "He'll stand trial for aiding an escape and assaulting a deputy, likely get 20 years hard labor." "So it's over," Olivia said, the reality slowly sinking in. "Truly over." Wade nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "He can't hurt you or anyone else ever again." Relief washed over her, followed by exhaustion as the fear and tension of the night drained away. She swayed slightly, and Wade moved forward to steady her with a hand at her elbow. "You should rest," he said softly. "You've been awake all night." "So have you," she countered, taking in the signs of his fatigue. Sheriff Hodges cleared his throat. "Think we could all use some rest after the night we've had. I'll post deputies around town for the next day or so, just as a precaution, but the danger's past." He settled his hat back on his head. "Miss Frost, Mrs. Abernathy, I'll bid you good day." After the sheriff departed, Mrs. Abernathy tactfully announced that she needed to inform her cook about the morning's developments. Leaving Olivia and Wade alone in the parlor, for a moment, they simply looked at each other, the shared ordeal creating a connection that transcended conventional boundaries. Then Wade took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "I thought of you every minute out there," he said, his voice low and intense. "Knowing Keller was free, that he might try to reach you, it drove me to find him at any cost." "I was so afraid for you," Olivia admitted. "When I heard the shots in the distance, I kept thinking." She couldn't finish the thought, the fear still too raw despite its resolution. Wade reached for her hand, propriety forgotten in the aftermath of danger. "I made you a promise, Olivia. I intend to keep it, not just for one night or until some crisis passes." The implication of his words, the depth of commitment they contained, made her heart race. "Wade, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that tracking Keller through the darkness, facing the prospect of losing you before I ever truly found you, it clarified things for me." His fingers tightened around hers. "I don't want to return to my solitary life in the mountains, not without knowing if there might be a future for us together." Olivia's breath caught. "You mean?" I mean that I care for you deeply, he continued, the words coming more easily now that he'd begun. I know it's sudden. We've known each other barely 2 months, but in that time you've become essential to me in a way I never expected or sought. Joy bloomed in Olivia's chest, bright and overwhelming after the fear of the night. I feel the same, she whispered. I've tried to tell myself it's too soon, that grief and gratitude might be clouding my judgment. But the truth is, I began falling in love with you that first night when you promised to keep watch till morning. At her confession, something transformed in Wade's expression, a lightening, as if some long-carried burden had finally been set down. He raised his free hand to gently touch her cheek. "May I?" he asked, his meaning clear in the way his gaze dropped briefly to her lips. Olivia nodded and Wade leaned forward, his kiss gentle and questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. It was a first kiss that held the promise of many more to come, tentative yet certain, like the beginning of a journey long anticipated. When they parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. "I never expected to find this again," he murmured. "After the war, after everything, I thought that part of life was closed to me. For me as well," Olivia admitted. "Coming west, I only hoped for independence, for a life of my own making. I never dreamed I might find someone to share it with." Wade drew back slightly, his expression turning serious. "There's much to consider. My ranch is remote, the life they're demanding, and you've built something valuable here in Raton, the school, your position in the community. Those are practical matters," Olivia said. "We'll find solutions together." A thought occurred to her. "The invitation to visit your ranch, does it still stand?" "Of course," Wade replied, "more than ever." "Then let me see where you live, the life you've built there," she suggested. "When school closes next week for summer break, I could come for a visit. We have time to discover if what we feel can bridge the distance between your mountains and my classroom." The practicality of her approach seemed to reassure him. Wade smiled, the expression transforming his usually solemn features. "A sensible plan. We have time." "We have time," Olivia echoed, returning his smile, "and we have each other." As Wade drew her into another embrace, Olivia reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her to this moment. Thomas's death, her desperate flight through the mountains, finding Wade's cabin in the darkness, each tragedy and coincidence had led here, to this unexpected happiness. Perhaps Thomas had been right in his final letter. Even in the darkest night, morning always comes. And this morning, bright with new possibility, was one she would cherish for all the days to come. True to her word, Olivia visited Wade's ranch the following week after school closed for summer break. The journey took most of a day on horseback, winding up mountain trails that grew progressively narrower and steeper. When they finally crested a ridge to look down on a verdant valley nestled between towering peaks, Wade reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, a hint of pride in his voice. "Garrett Ranch." Below them lay a picture of rustic beauty, a sturdy log house larger than his hunting cabin but still modest in size. Several outbuildings including a barn and corral, and beyond them, meadows where cattle grazed peacefully. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. In the distance, snow still capped the highest mountains despite the summer warmth. "It's beautiful," Olivia said sincerely, taking in the isolated splendor of the place. "So peaceful it can be," Wade agreed. "Though winters are harsh and there's always more work than hours in the day," he glanced at her. "Different from town life." "Different, yes, but not in a way that frightens me." She smiled at him. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Wade, and the beauty here. It's worth whatever challenges come with it." Relief flickered across his features. This was the test. Olivia knew whether she could appreciate his mountain refuge or would find it too primitive, too isolated after the relative comforts of town. As they rode down into the valley, details emerged that spoke of Wade's character. The ranch was meticulously maintained, everything in its place from the neatly stacked firewood to the carefully fenced garden. The house itself, when they reached it, proved larger than it had appeared from a distance. A main room with a stone fireplace, a proper kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and even a small study lined with bookshelves. "You built all this yourself?" Olivia asked as Wade showed her around. "Most of it," he confirmed. "Had help with the barn raising and some of the heavier work. Neighbors may be few out here, but they're reliable when needed." "It's more comfortable than I expected," she admitted, running her hand along a polished pine table that showed expert craftsmanship. Wade smiled slightly. "Thought I lived in a one-room shack with dirt floors. Not quite that primitive," Olivia laughed, "but I didn't expect the glass windows or the study." "A man can appreciate solitude without embracing discomfort," he said. "The books keep me company during winter storms, and the windows." He glanced at the large panes that framed the western view. Some vistas deserve proper viewing. That evening, after a simple but satisfying meal, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. The air was cool and sweet with the scent of pine, the silence broken only by distant birdsong and the murmur of the creek. "Could you be happy in a place like this?" Wade asked quietly, the question that had clearly been on his mind throughout the day. "Away from town, from other people, from the conveniences you're accustomed to." Olivia considered the question seriously, knowing her answer mattered deeply. "I believe I could," she said finally. "Not because the isolation appeals to me particularly, but because what matters most is the company I keep, not the setting." She turned to face him in the fading light. "The question is whether you could be happy sharing this solitude. You've lived alone for 8 years, Wade. Having another person constantly present would be a significant change." "One I've been considering since the day you appeared at my cabin door," he replied. "The truth is, Olivia, I've never felt lonely here until recently. After meeting you, after our correspondence and conversations, the silence began to feel empty rather than peaceful." His honesty touched her deeply. "Then perhaps we can find a middle path," she suggested. "I have obligations to the school through the next term at least. But summer breaks, holidays, those could be spent here. And perhaps, in time, we might consider alternatives that allow us to share both worlds. Such as, there's talk of building a school closer to the outlying ranches," Olivia explained. "Several families live too far from town to send their children regularly. If such a school were established nearer to here." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "It could work, and I have business in town regularly enough that visits wouldn't be infrequent." He reached for her hand in the gathering dusk. "We'll find a way if this is truly what you want." "It is," Olivia assured him, twining her fingers with his. "You are what I want, Wade Garrett. The details will work out together." The week passed too quickly, filled with rides across the high meadows, walks along the creek, and evenings spent in conversation beside the fire. Wade showed Olivia every aspect of his life there, the daily chores of ranch work, his favorite fishing spots, the hidden valley where wildflowers grew in profusion like a natural garden. On their final evening before returning to Raton, they sat again on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The mountains loomed as black silhouettes against the indigo heavens, majestic and eternal. "I used to be afraid of the night," Olivia mused, her head resting against Wade's shoulder. "The darkness seemed to hide so many dangers. And now," he asked, his arm warm around her. She smiled up at the star-filled sky. Now I see the beauty in it, the stillness, the peace. And the promise that morning will come again. Wade turned to face her, his expression solemn in the starlight. Olivia, before we return to town tomorrow, there's something I need to ask you. Her heart quickened at his tone. Yes. These past months since you came into my life have shown me possibilities I'd long since abandoned, he began. You've reminded me that solitude, while peaceful, is a poor substitute for genuine connection. He took both her hands in his. I don't have eloquent words or grand gestures to offer, just the promise that I will love, honor, and protect you all the days of my life, if you'll consent to be my wife. Though she had sensed the direction of their relationship moving toward this moment, the actual proposal still filled Olivia with joyful surprise. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, Wade, I will marry you. His kiss was tender and reverent, sealing their commitment under the vast canopy of stars. When they finally drew apart, Wade reached into his pocket and produced a small object that caught the starlight. It was my mother's, he explained, showing her a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. She left it with her brother for safekeeping during the war, and he returned it to me afterward. I've carried it all these years, never thinking I'd find someone to give it to. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Olivia felt the significance of the moment, not just their commitment to each other, but Wade's final reconciliation with his past, his willingness to build a future from the ashes of old sorrows. It's beautiful, she said, admiring how the diamond caught the starlight. And it fits perfectly. Like us, Wade said simply, drawing her close again. Not without adjustments ahead, but fundamentally right. They were married in Raton's church the following month, with Mrs. Abernathy organizing the celebration, and the entire town turning out to witness the union of their respected schoolteacher to the mountain rancher who had won her heart. Sheriff Hodges stood as Wade's best man, while Sarah Evans, Olivia's favorite student, served as maid of honor. As Olivia had proposed, they developed a rhythm that accommodated both their worlds. During the school term, Wade stayed at the small teacher's quarters behind the schoolhouse whenever he came to town, his visits becoming more frequent than his previous rare appearances. During school breaks, Olivia joined him at the ranch, gradually adding her touches to the home curtains at the windows, quilts on the beds, flowers in the garden. By the following spring, construction had begun on a new schoolhouse halfway between the ranch and town, where children from outlying homesteads could receive education without traveling all the way to Raton. When it opened that autumn, Olivia took the position as teacher, allowing her to split her time more evenly between town and the mountain ranch she now called home. Their first child, a son they named Thomas Wade Garrett, was born the following year, a strong, healthy boy with his father's sea-gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Emily Rose, named for both grandmothers neither child would ever know, but whose legacies lived on in the values Wade and Olivia instilled in their children. Life in the New Mexico territory remained challenging, at times harsh winters, occasional drought, the ordinary difficulties of raising children, and maintaining a ranch miles from the nearest town. But together, Wade and Olivia faced each challenge with the same resilience that had brought them through their individual sorrows to find unexpected joy together. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Wade surprised Olivia with a special gift, an addition to the ranch house that he had built in secret during her teaching days. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and windows that framed the mountain view she had come to love as much as he did. For the teacher who brought light to the darkness, he said, as he showed her the room, sunlight streaming through the new windows to illuminate shelves already half filled with their combined collection of books. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this place and this life. The tragedy that had taken Thomas had also, through a series of unlikely events, led her to Wade, to this mountain valley, to the family they had created together. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Wade asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how life takes unexpected turns," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "I came west seeking only independence, perhaps a quiet life teaching. Instead, I found everything I never knew I wanted." Wade's arm tightened around her. "Any regrets about the city life you left behind?" Olivia shook her head, watching as Thomas showed his younger sister how to skip stones across the creek, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Not one," she said with absolute certainty. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." As darkness fell and the children were called in for supper, Wade and Olivia remained on the porch a moment longer, watching the first stars appear above the mountains. The night no longer held fear for either of them, only peace, and the certainty of another dawn to be faced together. "I love you," Wade said simply, the words no less powerful for their familiar repetition over a decade of marriage. "And I love you," Olivia replied, reaching for his hand as they had countless times before. "Thank you for keeping watch that first night, and every night since." Hand in hand, they went inside to their children, to the home they had built together, leaving the night to its peaceful solitude and the promise of morning that always, inevitably came.